Hello once again. We do welcome you once again to Night Talk, and we proudly welcome Robert Vaughn to the program. His extraordinary career includes starring with Paul Newman in The Young Philadelphians, for which he received an Academy Award nomination, and in Bullitt with Steve McQueen. But for millions of us, he was our favorite TV hero each and every week, the sophisticated secret agent Napoleon Solo, the man from U.N.C.L.E.
Would you please tell me who you really are?
Napoleon Solo. I represent an organization designated as the UNCLE.
Uncle? Well, isn't that some sort of a spy?
Yeah, something like that. Uncle works for all nations. One of our responsibilities is to suppress any activity that might be a threat to world peace.
In Iowa?
Yes, in Iowa. It's all the story of U.N.C.L.E., the story of the films, an extraordinary life, all recounted in Mr. Vaughn's new book, A Fortunate Life. Robert Vaughn, it's a pleasure to see you in person after having you all these many, many years.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you.
It is fascinating, first of all, to achieve success in a business where the odds are always stacked against one. But to achieve the kind of success that U.N.C.L.E. did, that phenomenon status which lives on and on and on. To what do you attribute that?
I haven't the faintest idea. If I did, I'd be a producer and do another version of it. It came at the exact time of the James Bond pictures. I think Goldfinger and Russia with Love and so on. So there was obviously an international audience for this kind of thing. And the producer of the show, Norman Felton, was a friend of Ian Fleming. So they had, although there was much controversy after the show got on the air, legal controversy as to who said what about so on. They had mused quite a bit about doing a television version of it. And then Ian became ill, and it was kind of left aside for a while, and then they decided to do it. And one of the characters in one of the early books was named Solo, so they had a big go-around about that to make sure that they could use the name. Anyway, the show, unlike today, would have been canceled for this reason. It went on in September of 1964. By the first week in December, the ratings it wouldn't have lasted that long. But suddenly, the college kids who had been watching the show, and where there were no meters of any kind, and dorms and so on, came home, took over the television sets, and then it ascended quickly from its 64th into the top 20, and went on to become a huge hit, both domestically and internationally, and it went off just as quickly.
The fact that it suddenly turned and became this hit, did your life change immediately? I mean, you were a successful working actor. You had the Academy Award nomination. People knew who you were. You were in the biz. Did life suddenly change for you when the ratings changed?
It changed to the extent that I wasn't aware of the change, but in 1965 in the spring, I went to see a play in New York called The Royal Hunt of the Sun, starring Christopher Plummer. And some of my friends had already been seated. And this was, I guess, February of 65, which was only, 5 months after the show went on the air. And there was a rumor at that time that the show was hot. We hadn't seen any evidence of it yet. And I came down the aisle, and I heard more blah, 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 blah. Finally looked around, and I was still looking around. People started pointing at me. And they kind of called me by my name, and by the end of the show, I sensed that something was brewing pretty big then.
Were you comfortable with it?
Yes, I was comfortable with it. I mean, I never thought what eventually happened would happen, which would have a teenage audience like rock and roll people. But I wasn't, in modesty, I wasn't surprised, because I thought we had a great gimmick going in James Bond. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it took a while to take off was okay by me.
Series TV work, it's said to be, especially with an action series, it's an hour long, which means that you're shooting, 7 or 8 days?
Well, those days we shot in 6 days.
6 days?
Yeah.
Those are long days.
And the cameraman, Fred Koenikamp, who went on to win several Academy Awards, usually would spend about a week of every 6 weeks in the hospital with various stomach troubles and so on.
It's intense work. Doesn't leave time for you to do other work, I guess. At that point, you're locked in.
You're locked in, and I don't think I had more than 3 days off in 4 years.
extraordinary. Let's take a break, come back, talk about some of the movies, the extraordinary people with whom you've worked, and also get on to as well some of the political intrigue of the era and how you stepped up when many other people with celebrity names didn't, and how different you were than many of the celebrities who speak out now. Back with Robert Vaughn in just a moment. Don't go away.
There are no precautions taken against us.
Well, there's no need. Ship is a fortress.
But we might foment a revolution among the passengers.
Hardly. The captain keeps them satisfied. He's clothed them, fed them, provided them with their families. Contentment does not breed revolution.
Then it seems we are at an impasse.
Well, not necessarily. We could deprive them of their utopia.
And how exactly do that?
We sink the ship.
Back once again, Robert Vaughn is our guest. His wonderful new book is A Fortunate Life, recounting tales from those days of the mega hit, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., before and after. Why did you decide to become an actor? It was in the family, in the blood, as it were, huh?
Oh, it was really in the blood, yeah. My mother was a stage actress. She was on Broadway playing Lucy Seward in the early 30s in Dracula. My father, biological father, was a radio actor in New York. My stepfather was an actor. My mother's parents were actors. And I even heard that my grandfather's side of the family, there was some acting going on in the French theater in the 19th century. So it's
there.
A family business.
The family business.
I could have been making bacon, I guess. But
perhaps. First time you ever appeared to perform in front of people?
In front of people? Well, that would be when I was a little boy, and my mother had taught me the to be or not to be soliloquy, and I would jump up at a moment's notice and recite it in front of anyone who was around with the picnics in the park or 4th of July celebrations and so on.
I think it took me until I was about 15 to understand what to be or not to be actually meant.
Yeah.
And the first time on stage?
Well, the first time on stage, I think I was 12. I just had a one line. The line was telegram from Mr. Edward Mason. And I know that as the run progressed, it was a tent show, incidentally, in Iowa. As the run progressed, I would get further. Actually, I was supposed to be in the doorway, but I got further and further and further on stage. It was practically in the footlights.
Moving in. The move west. Why does one go west?
Well, that's another serendipity of my life that I allude to in the forward to the book. My stepfather died at a very early age in the spring of 1951, and my mother had been in California touring with a show called Allegro, which was the first and only Rodgers and Hammerstein serious musical. And so she came back there utterly destitute and said she'd like to go to California, and would I be interested in going? And I had a car, a terrible old car. So we went out there, and it was the summer of 51. And the thing that I noticed most about being the UCLA campus, I thought, this is just the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. And so I decided to go back out there and go to school. I was going to California to go to UCLA because it had a pretty campus. That was the depth of my thinking.
It's not unusual for young people to think pretty much that way. You know,
and after I got there, I didn't get to UCLA for various reasons. Just credits weren't right. Mm-hmm. And I went to City College instead, which cost $6 a semester at the time. That's it.
It's not no student loans necessary, right there.
Yeah, well, you had to get a student loan, $35 for the actual. So I just stayed on, and if my stepfather hadn't have died, I never would have gone to California on my own, and I probably would have gone to the University of Minnesota where I was going, and gone on to New York and tried to work in theater and radio.
But being out there also, you did something that it was different than a lot of other students. You, from what I understand, you say in the book, you demanded the right to also go out and be able to work as an actor while you were studying.
Yeah, I just her name Jerry Blunt. I said, I've been around professional theater all my life and part of it, yeah. And I said, I'd like to not be restricted by the covenant, which I guess is implied here, that you can't work professionally and also go to school. Mm-hmm. So he begrudgingly allowed me that luxury, and that turned out very well because I got involved with a group called the Stage Society, which was kind of the West Coast version of the group theater 10 years later. And that's basically how I started dipping my stick, as it were, dipping my oar, I guess is the correct phrase, into professional acting.
First time you appeared on television or on film?
Yeah, the first time was I played the doctor who took care of Lincoln from the time he was shot until the time he died, a 22-year-old lieutenant in the Army named Dr. Charles Leal. And the guy playing Lincoln happened to be the local weatherman. And he had a mustache on. And I remember in one of our early rehearsals, I had a mustache, and they came off together. And obviously, that didn't appear on the screen. But that was my first. It was the leading role in my first television show, so I kind of started out as a leading man by accident.
Was there, as I hear about the studio system, I mean, you got a chance to really make acquaintances with others who are coming up at the same time, and sometimes I'm awestruck by the people such as yourself who become stars, legends, who palled around when you guys were still just trying to find your way.
Well, pretty much the case. I mean, I knew Dennis Hopper. I had Jack Nicholson as a student when I was teaching. Warren Beatty was kind of around the periphery. George Hamilton somehow acquired like a 39 Rolls Royce or something.
And a suntan to go with it, no doubt.
To go with it. And he was, so there were a bunch of us. All had come out from the Middle West or the East Coast and continued to know each other and went different ways during the 50s and 60s.
The first film role, which
Well, the first film role was in a movie called The Ten Commandments, if you can call that a film role. I was selected to play a Jew, and the concept of a Jew in The Ten Commandments was that I had to be in a loincloth and be sprayed dark in the morning. So I did this. I was getting $100 a day for doing it, because I was a member of the Actors' Equity at the time. And then, lo and behold, I got a call from my agent, who had nothing to do with my getting the original part. It was a friend of mine. And he said, "I've managed to make another deal." He says, "You're going to be able to play an Arab chasing yourself. And you get another week's work." So that's a total of, $1,000 for 2 weeks' work. So I said, well, this is better than Red Arrow Messenger, which is where I was looking at the time. and I decided that was for me.
Well, yeah, you get to chase yourself in the same film. What's interesting, though, is how quickly one suddenly goes from seeing oneself to an Academy Award nomination. And we have to take a break. We'll come back and talk about that. A Fortunate Life is the book. Robert Vaughn is our guest, and we're coming right back with more in a moment. Don't go away. Back once again, continue our conversation with Robert Vaughn, his marvelous new book, A Fortunate Life. How do you suddenly find yourself with Paul Newman in a film that ultimately provides you an Academy Award nomination? I shouldn't say provides you, you earned it. How did that happen?
Paul and I belonged to a health club on Beverly Hills. It was called the Beverly Hills Health Club. It wasn't in Beverly Hills, but that's irrelevant in Hollywood. And we just knew each other I knew him, of course, as he had done Somebody Up There Likes Me, the movie, and the infamous Silver Chalice, which he took an ad disowning his participation in it. And I got a call to go out and get a script it was called The Philadelphian at the time. They changed it to The Young Philadelphians for legal reasons. And they wanted me to test for it. And somehow either I mentioned this to Paul or he got the information. And he said, well, hey, man, I hadn't read the script at the point. He said, man, that's the best part in the picture. He said, that's a great part. He said, a guy goes to Korea, loses his arm, blah, 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 blah. So he said, well, why don't I test with you? And I said, well, wow, yeah, sure, absolutely. And that's what happened. Now, normally screen tests are done with a script girl off camera, back in the darkness somewhere, reading the lines like, I love you very much, and I wish you could be together with me forever and ever, kind of thing, Well, anyway, Paul did the test with me on camera, and the moment they saw the test, they stopped testing, and I got the part, and it was my first A picture, and I got an Academy Award nomination.
When you found out, how did you find out that you were nominated for an Oscar?
Gee, I don't really remember. I'm sure my press agent at the time must have called me in the middle of the night or whenever they would give out the nomination.
But that's got to be, I'm trying to presume what it's like. What is it like when you suddenly find out that this legendary award is suddenly at your, within grasp?
I was plus, nonplussed, and all over the place. Yeah.
Did you know your career was going to change, or did your career change as a result of that?
Well, it got me into the Magnificent Seven, I'm pretty sure. So therefore, there was a connection between Young Philadelphians, the nomination, and getting a chance to meet John Sturges, and getting in which we did not know at the time would become a legendary Western.
What was it like to make that film? Because you say it is legendary. At the time, though, did you just think it was another Western with an interesting character?
Not only did we just think it was another Western, we just thought it would be a bummer because it was based on the Japanese film, Kurosawa's film, Seven Samurai, and they were really had to start under a certain date. Unless they started on that date, they couldn't start for some reason. And we were being handed pieces of onion skin underneath the door at night for the scenes for the next day. And we thought, well, this is no way to make a movie. This bunch of guys, we're all in our 20s, we're telling John Sturges, the director, this is no way.
You don't know what you're doing, yeah.
Yeah, what are you doing, John? And
were you guys all pals at that time? Did you know all of these?
I knew Jimmy Coburn because we went to college together. I don't think the rest of us knew each other other than just we knew Steve from his television series, and Charlie Bronson. I think he had a series called Man with the Camera, I believe. But other than that, we didn't know George Buchholz. We didn't have any idea who he was. But we knew who the King was because the King deported himself as the King on and off the set.
And how was that?
Well, he was just very regal, and he played poker with us, and he was fine.
But was he always in that King character? I mean, the legend has it.
Pretty much so.
Really?
Yeah.
And we're speaking of Yul Brynner, obviously.
Yul Brynner, yes.
When that film, when they wrapped the film,
yeah.
Did you come away thinking differently than you thought going in?
No, we just thought it was that for most of us it was our first A picture. It was a picture because Brynner was the star of it, and it was much rumor that McQueen was going to be a big movie star, and this was his first crack at being a big movie star, and he definitely was. I don't know whether he took the picture from Brynner, but he was certainly equal Brynner in terms of importance on the screen.
Was he the character that we see? This sounds like fan club stuff, but I got to know. Was he much like the character that we got to know him playing many times over?
Yeah, I think,
complex, sullen, little withdrawn.
I think he was very much one of his things that he would do famously on his television series, which I never did. Was he'd take the script and he'd look at it and he'd say, "Oh man," he said, "Chris wouldn't say all that, man." So he said, "Maybe you got a shot of Chris over in the corner there, listen," because he didn't like to learn lines.
So he's the rare actor who took his own lines away.
Yeah, he don't want to. Well, less talk and more coverage of his face.
But because he trusted his own on-camera impression.
I think he trusted his star quality from the day he got into movies, and with the help of his wife, who was certain he was going to be what he became.
I want to talk more about star quality a little bit later. How long between then and Uncle for you?
Well, we shot that in 59. I think it came out in 60. Uncle went on the air in 64.
64.
So 4 years.
So at that point, because there used to be the big divide between movies and TVs, right? I mean, people in movies used to look down on TV, and then until they did TV and realized how great TV was. Did you ever think you were going to end up doing TV, or did you kind of want to do the movie track?
I wanted to do the movie track, but nothing came along of any great consequences. And then when I read the Uncle script, I thought, wow, this is James Bond on television. This should go. So, with the encouragement of my agent and the encouragement, I'd done a series the year before for the same producer, Norman Felton, called The Lieutenant with Gary Lockwood.
Yeah, absolutely, I remember that.
And you have a good memory for
I watched too much TV when I was a kid. What can I say?
Anyway, I figured, well, if you're going to roll the dice on a series, this would be the one to do it.
And McCallum joined. He was a supporting player originally, and you guys clicked together as buddies. A buddy film.
Very much so, yeah, and remain so today.
The fame that went with it. Did you Now, you were a very serious, you were a student. Had you already started your PhD studies during the uncle years?
Yes. Yeah. I was in the middle of the doctorate studying, I think in the mid-60s, yeah.
Why do you want to do that?
Well, some people play golf. It takes about the same amount of time, and you get to learn a lot of stuff.
Was it something you had always wanted to do?
No, I was just rolling along. I like going to school. And at the time, which we'll get to later, the war protest started, my protest. I guess in the back of my mind, I would have more credibility if there were 3 letters after my name. Although that didn't happen until much later. So.
Well, it also happened
but
as
I was
a
in
result.
the program, so.
Indeed, but also being able to take on William F. Buckley and beating him at his own game certainly helped. We have to take a break. Come back in a couple of moments. You'll see precisely what I mean. We continue with Robert Vaughn in just a moment.
The closest admirers of Mr. Kennedy, men like Mr. Schlesinger and Mr. Sorensen, think that this was a high act of statesmanship.
I disagree with Mr. Schlesinger and Mr. Sorensen.
I think it's increasingly interesting how many people you do disagree with.
Yes.
And eventually maybe I can find you disagreeing with Plato and Aristotle, and then we'll...
Yes, I do. I've written a number of papers on this.
Robert Vaughn then and Robert Vaughn now. Taking on William F. Buckley, he's considered the father to modern conservatism and just passed away last year. The idea of speaking out, certainly, I guess, your agent, the folks who are managing the showbiz career, the producers, the people with the shows, I would assume that they look at their star speaking out on an issue, and as Buckley points out in the debate, a war that still had 75% support among the American people, and they say, what are you doing? You're going to kill your career. Was that a calculated risk you were willing to take?
I didn't, in my infinite naivete, didn't even think about it. I just thought I would examine this situation, and I was asked to speak in Indianapolis, January 29th, 1960. And what happened was I was invited there to give a barn burner speech for the re-election of Lyndon Johnson. He said I gave not only the exact opposite, but there's a picture of people, I think I still have it, at the head table as I'm being introduced. And at the end of the speech, the entire head table is sitting there like this.
They didn't know what they were going to get.
Well, I didn't think it was an outlandish thing to say. Because
what did you say?
Well, I list them in the book. It's a 45-minute, basically that
the TV version of it is the soundbite.
Yeah, we basically had no right to be there, based upon many things, legal and otherwise, religious arguments and so on. And next Monday morning, this was a Saturday night, back in Culver City, California, where MGM is located, had a whole bunch of lawyers wanted to talk to me. Because I had the only copy of the speech. I mean, I'd handwritten it, and I still handwrite.
And they wanted to see?
They wanted to see it. I said, well, I have to go up to my office and roll all, the cover with ink and so on. And I think I had a secretary at the time, and she got half a dozen copies. And they all read it and said, well, there's nothing here that hasn't already been said by those that disagree with the war, which were Ernest Greening and Wayne Morris and
the senators who voted against the Gulf of Tonkin resolution.
Yeah. And the producer, who I later found out had been a very active socialist when he was in college.
You found out later.
Yeah. There was nothing. Nothing happened at all.
So you thought it had died over, or? Well,
I knew it hadn't died over because I immediately got requests from all over to speak to fundraisers and so on. The possibility of it being a problem died over instantly almost.
Did you jump at the opportunity right away? This were dissident Democrats who wanted to hear from you?
Yeah. Yes, I jumped at the opportunity because I believe very, very strongly in what I was saying, and the larger exposure I could get to those remarks, I believe I offered to debate anybody in Johnson's cabinet, as a matter of fact, in my supreme audacity and arrogance at the age of whatever I was at the time.
Did any of them take you up on your offer?
No, none of them did, but a fellow named William F. Buckley, the silver-tongued orator of the right, somehow got communication with me that he would like to debate this subject in Constitution Hall. I said I wasn't quite sure where Constitution Hall was, but I presumed it was somewhere near the Constitution. And that was canceled for one of us. Schedule wasn't possible. So we finally did debate in a small studio in Hollywood. I think it was July of '67, something like that. And the war was still very much sympathetic. The American populace, the voting populace, was very much sympathetic toward the war at that time. And at that time, this was the first year of firing line, Bill Buckley's lawyer was the moderator. He sat up between us, like we're debating here. You're Buckley, I'm May. And at the end, he's supposed to give a observation on who's done the best job. So he said at the end of the evening, he said, "I don't know who's ruffled the feathers more, the duck or the hawk." The dove or the hawk, the duck. And
was Buckley surprised by that? Do you think?
I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes down. Well, one person said, a friend of mine who was there that night said, there was a book had just come out called The Arrogance of Power, written by J. William Fulbright. And he said, "I think you bested him by the power of arrogance."
Senator Fulbright's book was upstaged by your performance. Yeah. Did you? How did you prepare for that exactly?
I went. I knew a monk named Brother John Bosco in a place called St. Andrew's Priory in Pear Blossom, California. This all sounds very strange for California.
No, but it's interesting because, and we'll show another clip of the show as well. You talk about Cardinal Spellman. You talk about some of the issues that Mr. Buckley seemed very surprised that you knew about. Yeah. We have to take a break. Let's pick it up there. Robert Vaughn, A Fortunate Life. We'll be right back.
Mr. Vaughn, that for you to say that the refugees were in part drawn to South Vietnam because Diem was a Catholic, it's a little bit like saying that the Jews who left Germany during the 30s to come to New York did so because LaGuardia had Jewish blood and Hitler didn't. And then that was considered invasion. But let me ask you this, because I think this is central.
Your historical analogies are incredible.
I would expect.
Robert Vaughn versus William F. Buckley. Mr. Vaughn, our guest right now, his new book, A Fortunate Life. So we went to break. You were talking about your preparation. Can I interrupt?
Yes, I went up there, and I not only I had done a considerable amount of study about the period after the play coup raids, which occurred in January of 65, which was when the war was expanded to the north. I'd already studied. I'd done my homework on the history of Vietnam, going back to Bao Dai and the Second World War, and where Ho Chi Minh was during Ho Chi Minh's efforts to contact Harry Truman, try to get some alliance there. And but immediately I went to read what Buckley had written, and I started with God and Man at Yale, his first famous book. And so I was kind of the young challenger up against the old champ coming in there. And if I recall correctly, the first question he asked me, thinking about democracy or something, and my answer was 322 words or something like that, and it was flooded with facts. And I think I saw the old master give a couple of his famous blinks, and he knew that I had come in and prepared.
Yeah. When you went through this process of becoming, well, did you consider yourself a political activist at that point?
No, not in the least. No, I'd never been involved in anything other than maybe a fundraising speech for somebody. Hubert Humphrey in Minneapolis, which is where I grew up.
Yep. But you found yourself in fairly short order, I guess, in the company of the President of the United States, who was introduced to you, recognized you, and apparently didn't like what he had heard you were saying.
Well, I very quickly, that story is I was going to Robert Kennedy's house. I just come back from Europe, and I believe I had gotten some Cuban cigars for him. And I was wearing a tux, and I got a call, and they said there's going to be a housewarming in Georgetown tonight at Bess Abel, who is, I believe, Mrs. Johnson's not press secretary, but social secretary. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to Representative Kennedy's house. And he said, it's going to be a Texas thing. I said, well, I'm wearing a tux. He said, oh, come along. I said, no problem at all. So I got there, and I was introduced to the First Lady, Lady Bird, and I began to hear behind me, yes, Mr. President, this way, Mr. President, Over here, Mr. President. I go, what's going on here? Turn around, there was Lyndon in a complete cowboy outfit. He was 6'3" going in, so with his boots he was 6'7", and then he had the hat. So that made him close to 7 feet far. That's a huge man. And he was introduced, and he said, oh yeah, he said, you're the speech maker. And he took me, swung me around, got me up next to him, and then got me in front of him somehow. He was a huge. And he said, well, good luck, son. And he threw me away like a dish rag. I laughed like hell. I don't think he did any laughing at all. But that was my one encounter with the LBJ grab.
The relationship with Bobby Kennedy. You became good friends.
Yeah, that came about as a result of The Man from U.N.C.L.E. The children were enamored by the show, loved the show, and they invited Ethel and Robert Bobby were at USC, and I was the host for them at the school. And she said, if you're ever coming through, the East Coast in the near future, we'd like to have you as a house guest. So I was going on my way to do a picture with Elkie Summer, and
not bad.
So I stopped there, and all the children were at the airport, National Airport, ready to greet me. And then Bob was making a speech that following morning, so Saturday morning, I believe, in Mississippi. And so it really started from a relationship with the children liking the show. It had nothing to do with either his knowing anything about me politically or well, I knew about him, of course.
Would he have been, because you talk about him, the passion, the fire, you also talk about the dark side of him as well,
I do mention, I think, sometimes I forget what isn't in.
You can't put it all in there. It's good.
I brought a girl to a Saturday afternoon, which was always events, everything. Everybody was competing in the cart book wall, playing touch football, and astronauts, and you name it, everybody was. And the girl was she wasn't what you would normally see in an East Coast wealthy gathering. And he clicked into that so fast, and he couldn't do enough for her. I mean, he just, what you want to drink? Do you want, can anything I can get you? Would you like to? And he was personally sensed her uneasiness. Mm-hmm. Shortly thereafter, in the midst of a football game, he was passing to me, and Brumus, their big old fat dog, got in the way. He kicked that dog and screamed at that dog like somebody had tried to shoot him. I mean, it was a terrifying moment, and then he was back with the girl. It was famously called Good Bobby, Bad Bobby.
Would he have been a good president?
I think he would have been a very good president because of the experience of what happened to his brother. I think he really delved into what it was all about, but why we were here and so on. Did a lot of reading of the Greeks. I know that for a fact. And he began to be aware of the outside world. That I don't think he was so much consigliere that he wasn't really paying attention to the world outside of the wealthy Eastern people that he grew up with.
They talk about this tremendous growth that he seemed to experience at that part of his life, where he was quite different than he was during his Attorney General days.
Yes, I only saw the growth part. I mean,
the assassination, it touched you profoundly. I mean, this was a very close friend. You were involved in some political activities here in New York.
Yes, I was working for Albert Lowenstein, who created the Dump Johnson movement. And I was staying at his house that night on Long Beach, Long Island, and it was about 3:10 in New York, 3:10 a.m. It was a very hot day, and I came in, sat down, and grabbed a beer and looked at the old black and white set, and suddenly I saw it on the screen, what had happened. And then Al came home. He was going to quit the race, he said, and then he decided not to. I remember we walked on the beach for a while and talked about this. Then he went back to Hollywood, went back to Los Angeles, came back on the funeral plane with.
And you were on the train that went to Washington.
Yes.
We have to take one more break, and when we come back, we'll talk about that train ride and the years that have come since. Back once again, continuing our conversation with Robert Vaughn, his new book, A Fortunate Life. So you were You were here in New York for Bobby's funeral, and then you were on that epic train ride to D.C.
Yeah, the funeral was, of course, at St. Patrick's, and then the train was scheduled to take 4 hours to get, which normally takes, I guess, to get from New York to Washington. It took almost 9 hours because of the crowds along the way, and the images are there in my mind forever. The women holding babies and one hand saluting or holding all the people that lived along the railroad tracks were out there saying goodbye, Bobby. We've lost our last good chance, and so on. And as a matter of fact, it arrived so late in Washington that they had made no preparations for what to do, and somehow the amazing Kennedys gathered thousands of candles, and so as the train arrived, you could see in the distance the candles and so on, and it was. I don't think anyone on the train will rank that as anything more than the most moving, emotional experience of their life.
You stood vigil at the casket.
Yes, I was. I was on the Barry Gray show. And we walked over there, I think it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and there were not too many people. There were all kinds of people outside waiting to go in the next day, but inside the church. And they asked Barry and myself to stand vigil next to the coffin. And so I think we were one of the, I guess, first, I don't know how many people that stood vigil.
After that, you actually leave the country for a while. You have a film that you're going to do, which takes you to Czechoslovakia, then Czechoslovakia, which I guess seemed to be a good place to go to get away from all that was happening in this country.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I ran into Al Lowenstein just before I left, and I said, why don't you come over and visit me in Czechoslovakia? There seems like there's freedoms breaking out there. And he said, no, I got to go to Chicago and get this sorted out, and we're going to try to get the hump to go to Hubert.
Dump the hump.
Yeah. And so anyway, to make a long story short, it is a very long story, and I will make it short. The Russians invaded Czechoslovakia, occupied the entire country overnight, and the cast and crew were under house arrest for about a week. And early on, it was very exciting. We were in the midst of an international intrigue. And then as the days went by and the food ran out and the wine ran out, and it was no longer terribly exciting. It was just terrifying.
Were you afraid for your lives? That the Russians would do something?
There were discussions of people writing letters to loved ones, but we just didn't know. Because the kids that were there, the soldiers were 19 years old. They'd been told they would be greeted with flowers in the streets. Where have you heard that since?
One of the, it reminds me too. One of the interesting things that, as I watched the Buckley clips last night as I prepared for this show, when he asks you what would be a justifiable war and what wouldn't, you go through a list which talks about needing the UNs are there for forces to be used, that it's not a preemptive attack. When you watch what happened, and I hate to jump from 40 years ago to now, but the parallels in many people's minds certainly are there in terms of our Vietnam experience. When you watch what happened with the situation in Iraq, what was going through your mind?
Well, as I recall, I was thinking, that's what I was talking about. This is not the way to go to war. If there is a way to go to war, would be the way Papa went to war, gathering the international coalition with all the sanctions in place. But the story has been written and will be rewritten and rewritten again. That this was the wrong war, the wrong place, the wrong time. I'm sure.
With what you experienced, the highs and the lows of the anti-war time and the loss of Bobby Kennedy, do you have any stomach for American politics anymore or not?
I really have not been involved at all. I've been involved with fathering and husbanding and things like that. I did not involve myself, no.
Had to close the door, essentially?
I think pretty much so, yeah.
In terms of the career, though, you certainly have been quite visible. The extraordinary success of films that have come out. I mean, we talked about Bullet a little bit there as well, but one of the legendary films with Steve McQueen, the Superman 3 film as well, and more recently, a phenomenal series called Hustle, which is BBC and AMC here in the States.
It was the first 4 years. We just finished the 5th season, and that's going to be on, I think, BBC International.
It's been said that you view the character you play as a Napoleon Solo in his later years.
Well, what happened was I suddenly was called overnight. I had to be there on the set 2 days later and so on. So the moment I got there, the people started, press started calling in and saying, well, what do you think about this character? What do you think about it? Blah, 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 blah. So I just winging it, tap dancing in the wings, said, well, suppose Napoleon Solo retired on his government pension and found out he couldn't live the life he'd lived all and so on, and he wanted something, a way that he express himself creatively but still keep him in the forefront of glamour and things like that. Well, why, he could be a con man who under the justification that every time anyone you con is part of the con and knows, so they're already acting illegally. So anyway, I just made this up as I went along. Well, it'll be forever in my biography.
Now it's there.
Yeah.
Once it gets out there.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy acting as much as you did?
Pretty much so. When I'm in a good show like this, it's a lot of fun coming to the set every day.
What's the biggest difference now and say 50 years ago?
Women. Women everywhere. Women.
How do you mean that?
Well, in the olden days, in the 60s, the only woman on the set was the script girl. Now, everybody, every job is along at a breakneck pace, as always on television.
And when you had the Uncle box set just come out last year, the fan base still there. Have you watched any of the episodes?
I have not, no. I did David and I both did a separate and together interviews, I believe, that appear in the box set.
Mm-hmm. If you were to watch them, what do you think you'd think?
I'd say, who's that guy there with all that black hair? Yeah.
Well, for many of us who did watch them in real time, we would say thank you, because you entertained us and you also gave us a lot to admire as we saw the other part of your life unfold as well. We appreciate it. Robert Vaughn, thank you so much. Robert Vaughn, A Fortunate Life. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.